Good afternoon, everyone. It's very nice to join this meeting today. And today I would like to give a talk on structural color pigments, which project has been sponsored by the DSCT project last year. And to begin with, as we can see in our daily life and also on the automobile coatings, the pigments and dyes, they are used everywhere. And this kind of colors, they comes from the absorption of the materials. So it gives us the complementary color in the other way. And our project is focused on structural colors. Structural colors is a new type of color that is determined by the structure rather than the compositions. And in our group, we have a lot of works working on structural colors. Here are two earlier works developed by our group. The first one is the transmission types of colors. By fabricating these structures, we are able to generate different transmission colors by simply change the period of the structure. So this kind of structure colors is highly structural dependent, and it does not really rely on the composition of the materials. And as you can see here, for example, in this blue symbol of the University of Michigan, actually none of the materials in it is blue or yellow, but it is actually created by a certain kind of structure. And another type of color is the reflection types of colors. We can create these kind of structures, and it is able to generate structural colors. Moreover, this type of techniques can help us to construct a tiny pattern like the blue M and also the Olympic rings at a micrometer scale. But consider for the automobile applications, it is definitely not the technique that we want for automobile applications, because just think about using vacuum-based techniques to fabricate these patterns on a vehicle is definitely impossible. So as many of you working in industry might know, there is another type of color, structural color, and the famous case is the structural blue that is developed by the Toyota company. Just take a look at this very fancy car. It is like highly saturated and pretty blue color. But can you imagine that actually there's no pigment in it that is actually blue, but actually it comes from a multi-layered structure. It's a stack of different layers of materials, and it is able to give this highly saturated blue color. But these techniques, even though you can see the color is pretty, so why don't we just use it everywhere in our automobiles? But it is actually deposited by a vacuum-based technique as well. So it is extremely expensive. And even though I don't know the exact cost for this car, it is only for extra luxury and expensive models here. So that is our job to figure out how can we tackle the cost issues if we really want to use the structural color in automobile industry. So I can give a good example that instead of using vacuum-based techniques, we can actually use like solution-based deposition techniques like the Sol-Gel and also some other dip coating techniques. And here it is also a multi-layered structure. Like the first layer is the copper layer, and the second layer is a dielectric layer, followed by another layer of copper. And for this case, as you can see here, by simply changing the thickness of the layer of dielectric layer, we are able to obtain a series of different structural colors as shown above. So this kind of method, it is very environmental friendly, but it is still not for automobile applications because it is a coating method and it is like includes too many layers, so probably it is too complicated. So let's turn to our own work. So actually our own work started with this project. In the beginning, we are just trying to deposit another layer of copper, but somewhat, indeed, most we got is copper, that's for sure. But somewhat that we also find, while most regions there are copper, there are also some regions, as you may notice here, there's a blue strip that shows a bright blue color. So it's very unusual and definitely something mysterious because it's just copper. So my advisor told me to pay extra attention to this sample, and we did. And under the SEM, you can clearly see while most regions in the copper, they seems like these spherical nanoparticles of low density. Another region in the blue area, it shows some new crystalline structure. So this hasn't been observed before in published papers, so we wonder why this will happen. And we take the X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy, and we found that instead of form copper, it formed another material, which is semiconductor, is the cuprous oxide, because the peaks resemble with cuprous oxide pretty well. And my advisor assigned me the work to find out what caused this phenomenon and how are we able to reproduce it, and even to make a uniform color out of it. So after a lot of trials, we finally find the right recipe. And for this method, by just immerse the substrate into the growth solution, and after a certain time, you can produce this large area of cuprous oxide of octahedral morphology. Octahedral morphology just looks like this. And moreover, it is not able to produce a simple type of color, but you find under different growth times, it can create a series of color that is almost across the whole visible range. So this is very unusual because previously to achieve different colors, we usually need to design different complicated materials, but here we just need to take different growth times. And we can see the color includes like the yellow, purple, blue, green, yellow again, and then red color even. So from the reflection spectra, you can even see very clearly that the peak just slightly redshifts to longer wavelengths with increasing growth time. And the growth time is not that long even. It's just like within 2 hours, you can obtain a different range of structural colors. So how did we grow this single layer? Actually, the technique is based on a seed-catalyzed growth process of cuprous oxide here. Based on the reduction reaction to form cuprous oxide, we catalyze the substrate with a specific type of Palladian nanoparticles. So the cuprous oxide will only be formed on the substrate surface instead of formed in the solution. So using this deposition technique, we are able to obtain a series of different colors. And it's so hard for me to see. And as we can see, in the beginning, when the color is just like a yellow color, you can see the crystal is doesn't have a specific morphology, and the density is relatively low. But with growth time increasing, gradually it starts to show different colors. And also the density of the crystal started to increase as well. And together is the morphology changed to this very clear octahedron type of morphology. So this kind of crystal morphology evolution, for some reason, they induced this color change, which we are not aware right now. So in the next step, we will try to figure out what caused this structural color, which is definitely different from all the previous cases. But in the first place, we found that in previous published paper, there is no optical properties for the cuprous oxide octahedron thin films. So which means that we need to figure out ourselves. So by taking 5 samples that is of relatively uniform color for the elapsometry measurement, we are able to obtain both their thickness and their refractive index data. And as you may notice, like here, the refractive index data for every sample is actually a little bit different to some degree. And it actually changes with the growth times. But at least we got the specific data for every specific sample, which support us to do some optical simulations to figure out whether it comes from the patterns or it comes from the multi-layer structure. So here we conducted the transfer matrix calculation to model their reflection spectra here. In this model, it basically treats the whole optical structure like a multi-layered and very uniform smooth thin film. And here, I believe the middle layer should be our cuprous oxide. And we know the thickness and the refractive index data of this layer. So what we do is that we calculate the electric field propagation in the matrix and across the interface of the different matrices. And we are able to obtain the reflection spectra of this optical structure. And as we can see, like very surprisingly, they match pretty well. Here are the data for the 5 samples that we got. And as you can see, the red curve corresponds to the simulation results, and the black curve corresponds to the measurement results. And they match pretty well, which means that in the first place, this model works. And why it works is because the hypothesis that it is the interference effect of the multi-layer model is actually the main contributor to the color generation here. So like from here, the scientific aspect is pretty clear. So after interacting with the DSAT committee, we learned several dominant ways that the automobile coloration used right now, and we start to evaluate whether our techniques can be used for the automobile industry. So we think that could be two strategies. The first strategy is based on our previous mechanism. If you notice, you just immerse the whole thing into the solution and it will give you a color. But the vehicle is just too large. It's just too large. If you want to immerse the whole vehicle into the solution, okay, even though if you achieve it, it is not like traditional coloration process. And also the method we used will pose some color non-uniformity. So for the commercial cars, you definitely want the whole car to be the same color. And like also for the repairs, like stuff like that. And another possible way is that conventionally we just use pigment paints for spray coating, which we learned a lot today. So we are thinking about if we are able to develop this pigment based on our coating technique, it will not only be more compatible with this kind of mature coating techniques, but also because it is broken down into smaller pieces, so it will provide a better control of the uniform colors. So here we think about like two strategies. The first one is the very conventional one. You just coat another layer, like what you do previously with titanium dioxide, iron dioxide, and tin dioxide. You coat them on the mica flakes, and you can obtain a series of different colors here, like the green color, whatever kind of color. So we're thinking about, is it possible for us to deposit our cuprous oxide on these mica flakes? And to be honest, we tried very hard, but our technique is good for the coating on a large substrate, even though it is a car, but it is just not suitable for microflakes in a powder form, like considering the whole experimental process. So what we found accidentally is that we actually don't even need mica flakes. We actually don't need a multi-layered structure. We just need one layer of cuprous oxide, and it is already able to show this bright structure color. That might be surprising to you at the moment, but as you can see from the results, what we did is that we first deposit a cuprous oxide layer on a substrate. Good, it showed color. And then we do the sonication. The sonication method is just do the, like what you use in the lab is a small sonicator. And then you put them like in a beaker with water. And then it will form this kind of cuprous oxide pigment in water. And surprisingly, you found that you don't need mica, but you can already obtain this quite a bright structural color. And this is just one example. But it is very appealing for us to potentially develop more pigments. And I still want to first say, like, this is not like a straightforward process, but the peeling off of the cuprous oxide off the substrate actually contains some surface processing methods here. So the reason why it will peel off is because the connection between the cuprous oxide and the substrate is weak, but it's not that weak. So in the first place, it is able to form like a uniform layer. But also in the second place, if you use the sonication, it is able to be reversibly like peeled off the substrate. And the reason why it happened is because we use a surfactant to do the surface processing. The surfactant here, it binds to the substrate based on a Van der Waals force, which is hydrophobic to hydrophobic force. But the binding to a hydrophobic surface is all right. But when we use a substrate like glass, which is more hydrophilic, the binding is not that good. So after the sonication, it will just peel off. And as you can see, the pigments that we got using this kind of sonication method, they show a pretty good color on a black background. We just evaporate the water out, and the performance is pretty good here. And moreover, using this method, because as we mentioned before, our method is able to produce like a series of different colors by changing the growth times. So you can obtain a rich palette of color. And during the process to talk to someone working in the color industry, we found that like for the traditional mica-based pearlescent flakes, like the titanium dioxide, it is relatively easy to achieve a cool color, like the purple or green color, but it is hard for you to achieve a warm color. You need to add extra stuffs like the iron oxide stuffs like that. But here, just using one material, we're able to achieve like at least including both warm and cool colors, and their colors are pretty great. And another feature of the pigment we developed different from others is that it is only based on a monolayer structure, which means that it is very thin and ultralight. For example, here we can clearly see the scale bar is like 1 micrometer. So the thickness of this flake is actually below 100 nanometer. So even use centrifugation, it is very hard to let it settle down. And also at the same time, the size can be much more below 50 micrometers. Like for this case, the size, I guess, is only like 10 micrometers. So why this is important is because you might notice that for the traditional mica flakes, if you try to grind them down into smaller ones, it will take a lot of energy, and usually it is very hard to achieve. So our method just use sonication, and it can offer a simple approach to produce these small and shiny pigments. So this might potentially be an advantage for this new technique. So after discussing more with the DSAD committee, like previously the colors are great, but all of them, they are in the water. But we know that in the automobile, like DSAD committee told us, usually they use the urethane paint. And the urethane paint is a polymer, so we need to test how the pigments looks like in the polymer. So what we did is actually that we mixed the dispersion that contains the cuprous oxide pigments with the polyurethane, and we just do a simple job casting method to see how the colors look like in polyurethane. If it works, it should look like bright color just like before. And we did it, but somewhat, as you can see, like a lot of stuff happened during your research. In the beginning, in the water, the purple color is very beautiful, but after it stays in the polyurethane, okay, anyway, the video doesn't show here, but it is like still a purple color, but not so obvious as previous. So that is an issue, and we try to solve it and to bring some hypotheses why it happened. Okay, the very first straightforward you can also think about is because of the low loading ratio. It's just like you didn't add in enough amount of pigments here. So what we did is that we do a test using the titanium dioxide pearlescent flakes. So it has like a similar reflectance to the cuprous oxide because they have similar refractive index. So here we find that with higher loading ratio, it definitely showed like much more significant color, which is very obvious to understand. And another possible reason is that if you still recall that it's based on the interference effect, which means that if the refractive index of your environment change, it will definitely influence the reflectance intensity of your pigments. So here, the polyurethane, it has a higher refractive index than the water, which means that the refractive index contrast between the cuprous oxide and the environment will actually decrease. So from the water to the polyurethane, the refractive index, refractive intensity definitely decreased. So it might be another cause why our samples are just not so obvious to see the color. So very straightforward, we just think about how to solve this problem. The first solution we come up with is that we just try to load more pigments into the polyurethane. So here, we collect some more green flakes from more samples just by the sonication method. And we find that in the beginning, the color is pretty, like green color is normal. And after loading into the polyurethane, I would say that in the first place, in the polyurethane, it is able to remain this bright and colorful structure color, but also it is very obvious that the color is just no longer green color anymore. So here comes another issue that we need to solve. And we definitely don't want a color change for the vehicle coating. You don't want your vehicle under the sunlight just change the color like after 2 days you buy it. So what we did is that we communicated with the DSAD committee, and they recommend us that we try to do the centrifugation to wash away any chemical residuals that could possibly stay in the water dispersion that contains the cuprous oxide. Because the cuprous oxide, they are synthesized by a chemical reaction, so it's very possible that there are some residual reductant that remain in the dispersion and will cause the cuprous oxide to be further reduced to copper. So here, we do the centrifugation, and actually, after doing the centrifugation for several times to wash away all the residual chemicals from the powders, I would say, it works pretty well, because here are some samples that I took pictures both under the sunlight and under the flashlight. And I would say that using this new pigment, it shows some bright sparkling effect, like from some pearlescent pigments. But that is like Here is another one. And you can see under sunlight, it is like consists of these many small pigments that is pretty sparkly, and also under flashlight. So using this technique, in the first step, we successfully demonstrate that it is able for possible applications because of its color is showed up here. So to make the conclusion, our project developed this ultralight monolayered cuprous oxide pigments that is produced by a simple solution-based process. Our pigments have several properties and unique features. In the first place, it is ultralight because of its thickness below 100 nanometers. And it can be easily break down into a small size, below 50 micrometers compared to the conventional mica flakes. And also it offers this rich color palette. Offers this rich color palette I show here, including both cool and warm hues. And also, in the polyurethane thin films, it is able to remain its shiny color appearance as well. So this is like I would say it's like the beginning of the pigment development process. So during the last year, we already thanked the DSAD committee for providing the financial support to this project. And especially thanks very much to the DSAD Scholarship Committee for all the discussion and guidance, which helped us a lot to use this technique to develop something for automobile industry. And me and Professor Guo welcome any questions regarding this project, and thank you very much for today.
Thanks for the great talk. Again, we have Hoover questions that we can get to, but looks like Connor wants to give one in person, so I'll walk back to him.
Maybe you walk all the way back.
I'll walk all the way back.
First of all, I just want to say, really cool talk. This is some really interesting work to see.
Thank you.
Do you have a sense of what the medium to long-term durability looks like for this, specifically the cuprous oxide, whether or not it's going to do further oxidation?
Yeah, to be honest, in the first place, the pigments we develop right now in polyurethane, we are trying to test that, try to anneal under high temperature to see whether the color changes, but we haven't found the perfect urethane for the annealing because the urethane just got burned itself under high temperature. So to be honest, we don't know its stability in polyurethane right now, but previously, while it is in water, after at least 3 months, the color is still the same in water. So it should be pretty stable in water, and I believe that after it is frozen in the polyurethane, it should be stable, like stay there for a while if you don't heat it up to very high temperature or do something like very cruel to it anyway. But yeah, we still need to test that right now, like on the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's difficult to tell from your pictures, but how much angle dependence is there in the colors you've made?
Oh, the colors, they actually have like a flip-flop effect, just similar to the automobile industry coatings right now. So it is actually like if you see the color from a specific angle, it will be specifically very shiny to your eyes. But when you turn to the other way, it is like transparent, like there's no color. But I believe if I can show a video here, it looks like pretty flip-flop effect, and you can see colors from different parts under different angles. I'm not sure whether that answers your questions. It's a little bit hard to describe it by just talking, but.
And is there something special about copper oxide as opposed to aluminum or magnesium or some other metallic oxide that you could make these out of?
Yeah, the reason why cuprous oxide works pretty well here is because of its high refractive index. Because if you want to generate really strong interference effect, you want the refractive index to be high so you can generate different colors. Actually, the refractive index is similar to titanium dioxide. It might be a little bit lower than the iron dioxide, but it got some advantages that if you try to produce such color using this material, the price is low because it's copper. But I would say the most significant feature is the high refractive index. And together, another feature is that it has absorbance in the near UV range, which means it absorbs the cool light, so it is able to produce warm light, similar to the iron oxides. But titanium dioxides do not have absorption in the near UV range, so it is not able to produce warm light. Yeah, that are features for the materials.
The online questions center around, I guess, the morphology and how easy is it to tune the thickness and then your flake size? I know you're doing sonication, so I'm not sure if it's just how it happens to fall off, or do you have more control over the size of the flakes?
You mean the thickness of the flakes?
Well, the thickness and the size,
and the
both,
size.
yeah.
Okay, that's a really good question, and that's what we are working on right now. Because think about it, it's controlled by time, and by time you just mean that you can stop the reaction right away when it's time. You actually need to take that out of the reaction solution and you need to rinse it. So actually the control is not that precise, I would say, but during a specific period of time, the color is similar to each other. So if you make them into these small pigments, it is very hard for you to see the color difference because, anyway, as you can see from the palette that we showed before, you can barely see the color non-uniformity out of it, except for some samples. So which means that it has some region that is durable. And for the size, it is very hard to control, I have to admit, because it is also depending on the time and also for what kind of sonicator that you are using. So it depends on your experience. You can create different kind of appearances for these pigments as well. We are also trying to figure out some other ways, like to use annealing to peel them off the substrate, and that might provide a better control on the thickness and on the size of these pigments. Yeah, it might be very small if you sonicate it for too long. That's a good question. Thank you.
Any more questions in the room? All right, let's thank our speaker again.
Okay. Thank you.